Ukraine has killed the deputy head of Russia's Navy as he was reportedly plotting a new invasion of Sumy. It's the second successful strike on a command post in as many days. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. News breaking today: Russia has confirmed that Major General Mikhail Gudkov has been killed in a Ukrainian missile strike into Russian Kursk province. Major General Gudkov was the deputy head of the Russian Navy who'd only been promoted into that role less than 6 months ago, personally by President Vladimir Putin, and he was in charge of the Navy's naval infantry, the Russian Marines, among Russia's most formidable forces, and they have been massing in huge numbers. They are among the 50,000 Russian soldiers who are reportedly massing in Kursk, stoking fears that Russia is planning a new invasion, because Russia invaded Sumy in the first hours of the war 3 years ago in February 2022. Its forces largely sort of roared through most of that province, bypassing the provincial capital, Sumy, as they tried to march on Kyiv, but they were forced to abandon Sumy when Russian forces were forced to abandon their march on Kyiv. And that first really significant retreat, if you can cast your minds all the way back to March and April of 2022. Major General Gudkov, a 42-year-old naval infantry commander, was promoted on the strength of the work he had done commanding Russia's 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. That is a unit that Ukraine has accused of war crimes, including the execution of prisoners of war. Not something that would worry Vladimir Putin. He promoted this man to be deputy head of the Navy and commander of all the naval infantry forces. So he was in a command post, we understand, early on Wednesday morning in a place called Koronevo, just 11 miles from the border with Ukraine, when that was hit by a volley of at least 4 missiles. Unclear at the moment what missiles Ukraine used. Russia said there were 8 fired, 4 were shot down. It appears at least 4 found their target. This is a major blow, humiliating blow really to Russia. The fact that not only Ukraine has the intelligence to know where people like Gudkov are going to be, but it has the ability to act on that intelligence. Now, there have been at least a dozen Russian generals killed during the course of the war. Major General Gudkov is not the most senior. If you cast your minds back just this year, of course, General Igor Kirillov, who was the commander of Russia's nuclear, chemical and biological forces, he was killed by a explosive device hidden in an electric scooter outside his apartment building. Then we saw Yaroslav Moskalik killed by a car bomb parked outside a building where he was believed to have been staying. And many more killed in strikes inside, or sort of in combat as it were, in occupied Ukraine as well. But significant because this comes just 2 days as well after a similar strike, reportedly with British-made Storm Shadow missiles on a command post of the 8th Combined Arms Army in occupied Donetsk. And that was where Colonel Ruslan Goryatskin was among many casualties killed there. This speaks in a way to Ukraine's strategy whilst Russia continues its kind of attritional blast their way forward at huge cost, loss of life, paying that huge price in men and material to gain precious few square miles of territory. Ukraine continuing to try and take out the high-value targets, and we've seen that with senior commanders throughout the war. We've seen that with, for example, the strikes on ships and submarines in Crimea. We've seen it again this week with a drone strike claimed by Ukraine's GUR, that's the military intelligence agency, claiming that they used an £80,000 drone to destroy about £90 million worth of Russian military hardware, including a Sukhoi Su-30 jet, that's the fighter jet known in NATO reporting name Flanker, and also air defence and radars on that airfield in Crimea as well. That reminds us, of course, the thing we talked about last week about the importance of staying on the right side of what the military now is calling the cost curve. if you're going to take out a target, you have to be able to do it with something which is less expensive than the thing you're trying to shoot down or destroy, if possible. Certainly if you're going to try and do that repeatedly over the course of the war. Otherwise, in a conflict like this, where it is a battle of will and resources, if the weapons are more expensive, then the resources are going to run out more quickly. So that's what we've seen. The killing of General Gudkov in Kursk, the killing of Colonel Goryachkin in Donetsk, and that strike on that strike on an airfield in Crimea. We've also seen this week spectacular footage of a successful Ukrainian long-range strike on an ammunition depot in Kartizsk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That is in occupied Donetsk. So long range, but certainly not as long as some of the other strikes we've seen, triggering massive explosions. Again, part of Ukraine's attempt to try and deplete Russia's ability to continue to prosecute, to continue to wage this war by taking away Russia's resources. But let me be very clear, it has not been all good news for Ukraine by any stretch. We are clear-eyed about the challenges Ukraine is facing, and Russia has ramped up its offensives on the ground, perhaps emboldened by the news that came out this week that American President Donald Trump has suspended with zero notice the deliveries of some high-tech weapon systems to Ukraine, including the Patriot missiles that are fired from Patriot air defense systems. Those are Ukraine's most sophisticated and advanced form of air defense missiles. They are the ones, perhaps the only ones we understand at the moment, that can shoot down things like the Kinzhal, the Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile. Now that decision took Ukraine and Ukraine's other allies by surprise. The only thing that is not surprising is the speed with which the White House can flip-flop in its support for Ukraine. President Zelensky is due to discuss American support with Donald Trump on Friday, although officials hinting that that call is not set in stone. It's hopefully going to happen on Friday. European allies, according to Bloomberg, hopeful that they can convince America to turn the tap back on. You remember the tap was turned off very abruptly in March when Zelensky had that fateful conversation, that fateful meeting with President Trump and his most senior lieutenants in the White House that ended in a row. At that time, the message we got from both Ukraine's allies and Ukraine was that the turning off the tap did not have a significant impact on the battlefield immediately, because Ukraine obviously has operational supplies on its own territory already. It's already able to use those munitions. The concern then was that intelligence sharing might be stopped, but actually the suggestion was that that endured, and that by the time the Trump decision to stop supplying had reversed again, had flip-flopped again, by the time the disagreements had been ironed out, Ukraine had managed to stretch what it had to cover that gap. Trump has also said that he's watching very closely this massing of Russian troops in Kursk Oblast. He hasn't specifically, though, said that he's warned Putin not to use them to invade. A lot of analysts pointing out that Trump's strategy appears to be to ask Putin nicely to stop the war. Please, Putin, please stop fighting. At the same time, taking away Ukraine's means to defend itself. So far, not proving a particularly successful strategy to bringing the war to an end. The American reason, the White House reason for stopping these supplies is that with all the munitions America has supplied to Israel to help Israel defend itself, is that the Pentagon needs to appraise its own stockpiles to work out, to ensure that it has enough of these very valuable and important weapons of its own to ensure America's own long-term security. A few other things to mention that we've seen this week. Russia has claimed that it has detained a Ukrainian spy. The fact that they're announcing that, whether or not it's true or not, impossible for us to know, but the fact that they're announcing that and making a big deal of it shows perhaps how concerned Russia is by the successful intelligence operations that Ukraine has carried out. Most of the ones we've been talking about over the last few weeks have been carried out by the SBU, but today we mentioned that one in Crimea by the GUR, the GUR Military Intelligence Agency. Ukraine has been launching these SOE style, that's a Special Operations Executive, the British Special Forces that operated during World War II, these SOE style attacks deep behind Russian lines, both against high profile individuals like those assassinations, and of course against the airfields, destroying so many of Russia's strategic bombing fleets. The fact that Russia making a big deal about arresting spies is perhaps their attempt to show their own people that they're doing something about it, and perhaps an attempt to try and intimidate others or anyone who might be persuaded to help Ukraine. And we've also seen extraordinary scenes of sort of tit-for-tat arrests between Russia and Azerbaijan. What's perhaps most telling about this, and it echoes similar detentions by Chechen forces of Russians on Russian territory, is the slightly gangsterish way that armed men in what appear to be Spetsnaz military fatigues are dragging people out of their cars. Perhaps something we'll keep an eye on, but unlikely at the moment, as far as we can tell, unlikely to make some material difference to the fight in Ukraine. But of course it may be linked to shifting loyalties and supply lines, or it may just be linked to mafia money deals. We'll keep an eye on that. As ever, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below. And remember, you can join Frontline, you can become a member, and that'll make it much easier for us to spot your questions, to see them in the hundreds and thousands of comments, which we love getting, and we'll do our best to answer them next week. I'll answer as many as I can on the show, or I'll get into the comments as well. Question number one is, why is Britain buying American F-35s? Britain's buying American F-35As, we reported this last week, in order to carry American nuclear bombs. Britain at the moment has no aircraft within the service, within the RAF, that are certified to carry air-launched nuclear weapons. Britain no longer has its own air-launched nuclear weapons. It had the WE-177 that was retired in 1998. The government has decided, post Strategic Defence Review, that it wants to have the option to be able to launch tactical nuclear weapons, to give politicians and military chiefs a broader range of options in the event of a spiralling conflict. Because at the moment, Britain has an enormous gap in capability between its most powerful conventional weapons, which are, for example, weapons like the Storm Shadow bunker buster, which has been donated to Ukraine, and its Trident II doomsday missiles, which are the nuclear deterrent carried on nuclear submarines. Those are weapons that can destroy cities. That's why Britain is buying American F-35s. It is because they want to be able to fly American nuclear bombs. Number two, why reveal what airport President Zelensky regularly uses? A very fair question. We were talking last week about that Day of the Jackal-style plot to assassinate Zelensky at Rzeszów Airport. Point number one I would make is that Ukraine's SBU intelligence service, they revealed the details of that plot. They identified Rzeszów Airport as the likely location of that attempted assassination, and they thanked Poland's Homeland Security Agency for their help defeating it. Now, the fact is, it is common knowledge that President Zelensky uses Rzeszów Airport. It is a simple fact of geography. Rzeszów is, as I said, the closest functioning commercial airport to Ukrainian territory. What would be irresponsible of us to report would be the precise timings or plans for a forthcoming visit or transit through that airport. And that is the sort of operational security details which we as responsible journalists would not reveal. But the fact that that airport is used is a simple fact of geography, and as I said, it was revealed by the SBU. Question number three, is Ukraine trying to kill President Vladimir Putin? Now, as far as I'm aware, Ukraine has not declared a public intent to assassinate President Putin. This is a question we asked Zelensky when we met him in Kyiv about 18 months ago, because he talks about all the assassination attempts he had endured. If I recall correctly, that was a question he declined to answer. But my understanding from his body language was that he was certainly not denying that is something Ukraine might look at. And finally today, a question about NATO's Article 5, which is Article 5 is the clause in the NATO agreement which is that an attack on one would be seen and treated as an attack on all. What would happen if a NATO member attacked another NATO member? I don't know if you're asking this with regards, for example, to America's designs on Canada or America's designs on Greenland, which of course is part of Denmark, both Denmark and Canada NATO countries. The fact is, it shouldn't matter in the sort of NATO constitution who attacks or which country attacks a member. It is the attack on the member that is taken as an attack on all. So were a NATO member to attack another member, then it would be the aggressor state which the other nations in the alliance would rally to repel. So they defend the attacked against the attacker. Thank you very much for watching. Again, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time. We're in a Ukrainian armoured vehicle and we're heading towards the Russian border.